Frost came early to Thornfield that year, the way it does in villages built too close to the river. It settled on the thatch before dawn, and did not lift until the ovens had been lit an hour. The lane outside Bell's bakery smelled of yeast and coal smoke and wet wool, and under it, if a person stood close enough to the window, the thin, sweet smell of bread rising in the dark. Iris Bell was the kind of woman a room forgot the moment she left it. Not pretty enough to be remembered, not plain enough to be pitied. Only quiet, and quick with her hands, and gone before anyone thought to ask her name twice. She was 26 that winter. She had been baking bread since she was tall enough to reach the paddle, and she had never once burned a loaf that mattered. Before the frost broke, the lane outside her father's shop would give her something to carry for the rest of her life, though she did not know it yet, standing there in the grey dark, with flour to her elbows. She weighed the dough by feel, not by scale. Her father said she had a baker's hands. Honest hands. Hands that did not cheat the flour. It was the only inheritance her mother had left her, along with a wedding ring too small to wear, and a Bible with no names written in it after her own. If a story like this one is the kind you keep coming back to, subscribe to the channel now, so you do not miss where it goes. That morning she saw them for the 4th time, 2 children, standing at the far side of the lane, where the mill wall threw a shadow even at dawn. A girl, 7 or thereabouts, with a coat too thin for the season, and a boy younger, maybe 5, holding tight to her sleeve as though the sleeve were the only solid thing in the world. They did not beg. They did not come closer. They only watched the window where the trays cooled, the way a dog watches a door it has learned not to scratch at. Iris had noticed them first a week before, and told herself they belonged to some carter passing through, and would be gone by Tuesday. They were not gone by Tuesday. They were there on Wednesday and Thursday in the same coats, at the same distance, with the same stillness that unsettled her more than crying would have. Her father, Thomas Bell, was a broad, slow man who loved his daughter and his ovens in about equal measure, and rarely noticed anything that did not involve either. He was elbow-deep in the flour bin that morning, not looking up. "There are children at the wall again," she said. "There are always children somewhere," he said. "It is not our lane to keep." She did not answer that. She only wrapped the heel of yesterday's loaf, the one gone a little stale, in a cloth, and told herself she was only clearing the shelf. She had a habit her father teased her for, and never once forbade. Every morning she baked 1 loaf beyond the day's order, not for the poor box at the church, not for any account anyone kept. A 7th loaf, when 6 would do, set at the back of the rack, where the heat lingered longest. She could not have said, if asked, why she did it. She only knew the ovens felt wrong to her if she baked exactly enough and no more. Enough was a hard, precise, and slightly cruel word. She preferred a margin. She had never yet found a use for the 7th loaf that she could explain to her father without him laughing at her. That morning she found one. She did not walk toward the children. She only opened the side door, the one that let onto the lane, and set the wrapped heel and the 7th loaf still warm on the low sill where the wall met the step, and went back inside, and did not look to see if they came for it. She heard nothing. When she glanced out an hour later, both loaves were gone, and there was no sign of anyone, only 2 sets of small footprints in the frost pointed away toward the mill road. She told herself it was nothing. Bread was bread. She would have done the same for a stray dog. What she did not know and would not know for a long while yet, was that a man in a plain dark coat had stood at the far bend of the mill road that same grey hour, mounted still, watching the whole of it happen from a distance close enough to see, and far enough not to be seen. He had followed the same two children from the gates of Eastmere Hall before first light, the way he had followed them twice before without their knowing, because for 2 weeks running they had slipped the garden wall at an hour when no one in that great house was awake to miss them, and he had not yet found the courage to ask them why, only the will to find out where they went. He watched a woman he did not know set 2 loaves of bread on a sill, and disappear without waiting to be thanked, and something in his chest, long since gone quiet, moved for the first time in 11 months. She did not know that either. She went back to her flour, and her scale, and the long grey morning, and did not think of the children again until the light was better, and the lane was full of ordinary noise, carts and dogs, and the miller's boy whistling badly. And by then the 2 small sets of footprints in the frost had already melted into nothing, as if they had never been there at all. She did not know. Standing at her ovens with her honest hands, white to the wrist, that the man on the mill road had a name half the county spoke, with a kind of careful hush, and that within the month her own name would be spoken in his house, and that neither of them yet understood what the frost that morning had begun. She only knew the bread had gone, and that some quiet, stubborn part of her was glad of it, and that she would set out the 7th loaf again the next day, and the day after, whether anyone thanked her for it or not. The children came back the following morning, and the one after that. Iris never spoke to them across the lane, and they never crossed it to speak to her. It became, without either side naming it, an arrangement. She set the loaves on the sill before first light. They took them, and were gone before the lane woke. It cost her nothing she could name, and everything she had to spare, which in a baker's house in a hard winter is not nothing at all. Flour had gone up 3d the stone since Michaelmas. Her father did not begrudge 2 loaves. He would have begrudged 20, and she knew it, and kept careful count in her own head so that it never once became 20. On the 5th morning the girl left something on the sill in the loaves place. A button, brass, plain, the kind sewn onto a gentleman's coat. Iris turned it over in her fingers a long while before she understood it was payment, offered by a child too proud, or too well taught somewhere, to take charity without giving something back. She did not keep it. She wrapped it back inside the cloth with the next morning's loaf, and left it on the sill exactly where the girl would find it, and underneath it a scrap of paper on which she had written, in her plain, unlovely hand, the only words that seemed true. "Keep your button." The bread was never for sale. She did not sign it. She told herself there was no one to sign it to. She did not know, and would not know for some weeks yet, that the girl's name was Della, and the boy's was August, and that both of them belonged, by blood and by law, to the Duke of Eastmere, whose wife had died bearing the younger of the 2 not quite a year before, and who had not, since that day, found it in himself to look either child fully in the face without seeing hers. She did not know that the man on the mill road, the man who had watched her from a distance with his collar up and his hat low, was that same Duke, riding out alone before his household woke, because sleep would not have him, and because 2 small runaways he could not seem to keep behind a garden wall had become, without his intending it, the only thing that still pulled him out of his own house before dawn. She did not know that he had ridden closer that 5th morning than any before it, close enough to see her set down the loaves and turn away without waiting, close enough to see that she never once looked to see if anyone watched her do it. She did not know that a man who had spent 11 months believing nothing in his life could still surprise him, had sat his horse in the cold, and felt, plainly and unmistakably, surprised. She only knew that the button came back to her the next morning, left again on the sill, this time beside a second one to match it, and that she laughed, once, softly, at the stubbornness of children, and put both away in the tin where she kept her mother's ring, for no reason she could have explained to anyone who asked. She did not know then that the loaves she gave away for nothing had already begun to be repaid, quietly, by a hand she had never seen, in ways she would not understand until the frost had long since broken. The first sign of it came 3 days later, and she nearly missed it. Her father came in from the yard, scratching his head over the rent, which had come due and been, he swore, already paid, though he had no memory of paying it, and no receipt to show for the swearing. The landlord's man had only shrugged and said the account was settled in full, and would not say by whom, and looked, Thomas Bell said, faintly embarrassed to have been asked. "Someone has made an error," Iris said. "Someone has made a very convenient error," her father said, and went back to his flour, pleased enough not to press it, the way a poor man is pleased not to press a piece of unexpected luck too hard for fear it will come apart in his hands. Iris pressed it a little, in her own quiet way. She asked the landlord's man herself, the next time he passed the shop, and got only the same shrug, and a look that told her he had been told not to say, and had decided, out of some private loyalty she could not account for, to honour that instruction even under her plain and direct questioning. "It is not my place to say, miss," was all he gave her. "Then whose place is it?" she said. He only touched his hat and walked on, and she stood in the doorway a long moment with flour drying on her hands, turning the puzzle over and finding no shape to it that made sense. She was not a woman who believed in luck. She believed in ledgers and yeast and the honest weight of things. An unpaid debt paid by no one she could name did not sit easily with her, and she said as much to her father that night over a thin supper. "It is Eastmere land we sit on," he reminded her. Perhaps the estate forgave a quarter out of custom. The estate had never forgiven a quarter in her lifetime, and both of them knew it, but neither pressed the thought further, because a warm hearth and a settled rent are not gifts a poor household examines too closely, for fear of finding out they were a mistake. She did not know that the same hand behind the rent had also sent, without any name attached, a note to the parish physician instructing him to call on the Bell household should illness ever come, and to send the account to Eastmere and speak of it to no one. She did not know that the man who had given that instruction had done it the same evening he watched her set 2 loaves on a cold sill, and walk away without looking back, as though the not looking back were the whole of the point, as though a kindness that waited to be seen was worth less to him than one that did not. She went on with her mornings. The 7th loaf kept appearing, the children kept coming for it, and going, silent as ever, though the girl had begun, in the last week, to lift one hand toward the window before she turned away, not quite a wave, more the memory of one, as if she were only now permitting herself to admit the bread came from a person and not merely a sill. Iris found herself watching for that half-wave more than she watched for anything else in her day, and did not examine why, only noted it the way she noted the rise of good dough, as a small and private satisfaction that asked nothing of her and gave her, in exchange, a reason to be glad of the cold mornings. She did not know then that within the month she would stand inside the walls of Eastmere Hall itself, hired to a task she had not sought, brought there by the very man whose face she had never once seen clearly across that lane, and that the 2 children she fed for nothing would turn out to be the reason, the whole and entire reason, why a duke who had not smiled in 11 months found himself, without quite deciding to, unable to stop thinking of a baker's daughter with honest hands and no name he yet knew how to ask for. The offer came through Mrs. Pruitt, who arrived at the bakery door on a Tuesday, looking like a woman who had walked the whole distance from Eastmere Hall on principle rather than send a boy, though a carriage stood plainly at the corner. She was a tall, dry, upright woman, somewhere past 50, with a housekeeper's flat, unreadable face and eyes that missed nothing, and she looked Iris over the way a horse trader looks over a mare, top to bottom, before she spoke a word. "You are Belle's daughter," she said, "the one who bakes." "I am," Iris said. "His Grace requires a woman to instruct the young Lady Della and Master August in their letters 3 mornings the week, and to see to certain mending the nursery maids have let go." "You are recommended." "Recommended by whom?" Iris said. Mrs. Pruitt's face did not move. "By those whose recommending is not your concern to question, miss. The wage is fair. The hours will not ruin your father's ovens. You may say no if you like. His Grace does not compel anyone to his service who does not wish it." Iris stood a long moment in the doorway, with flour on her hands, thinking of 2 small footprints in frost, of a girl's half-wave, of a boy's grip on his sister's sleeve, and found she did not in fact wish to say no. She said yes instead, plainly, without asking again who had recommended her, because some quiet instinct told her the answer would not be given twice, and she was not a woman who wasted words asking for what she would not be handed. She did not know, walking up the long drive to Eastmere Hall 3 mornings later, with her sewing basket on her arm and her hands cold inside her mended gloves, that the man watching her arrival from an upstairs window, standing well back from the glass so as not to be seen, was the same man who had watched her from the mill road with his collar up, and that he had arranged the whole of her hiring himself, through Mrs. Pruitt, under a name that was not quite a lie and not quite the truth, so that she might come near his children without ever needing to know why he wanted her there. She did not know that he intended to keep it that way as long as he possibly could. The house itself struck her first, before any person in it. Stone and old wood and beeswax polish, the smell of a place kept correctly rather than warmly, fires banked low in rooms no one used, a silence that had settled into the walls the way frost settles into thatch. It was, she thought, a beautiful house that had forgotten how to be lived in. Mrs. Pruitt led her through it without ceremony, naming nothing, until they reached the nursery, where the 2 children she already knew sat at a table too large for them, dressed now in clean wool instead of thin coats, and stared at her with an expression she could not read until she understood, watching it settle over both their faces at once, that it was recognition, and beneath the recognition, disbelief. "You," said the girl. "It is you." "I am Miss Belle," Iris said, because it seemed the safer of the 2 true things she might have said. The boy said nothing at all. He only crossed the room, quick and silent, as he had been silent at the mill wall, and put both his small hands around one of hers, and held on, the way he had held his sister's sleeve, as though he had learned that the world took things away unless you kept a grip on them. Iris knelt without meaning to. She did not ask why they had come to her lane hungry, or why a house this well kept had let 2 children go about in coats too thin for winter. She only said, quietly, that she was glad to see them again, and meant it more than she had meant most things she had said in a long while, and did not notice the door at the far end of the nursery, half open onto the corridor, or the man standing just beyond it, unseen, who had come up the back stair on some pretence of business with Mrs. Pruitt, and stayed instead to watch, through the gap, a woman he had not yet spoken one word to kneel down to his son's height without being asked, and receive his son's whole trust in the space of a single held hand. He did not go in. He told himself later it was because the moment was not his to interrupt. He knew, standing there in the corridor with his own hands closed at his sides, that it was something nearer to fear, the plain, unreasoning fear of a man who has forgotten how to be looked at kindly, and is not certain he can bear it yet. She stayed an hour that first morning, teaching the girl her letters on a slate, and mending the hem of the boy's coat, while he sat pressed against her side, and left as she had come, without seeing the man who had hired her, and did not think it strange, because great houses ran on rules she did not know, and a duke, she supposed, had no cause to trouble himself over the woman come to teach his children their letters. She did not know that he had watched her leave from the same upstairs window, and that he stood there long after her figure had gone small down the drive, turning over in his own mind a fact he had not expected, and did not entirely welcome, which was that he wanted, quite badly, to know her name properly, to hear her say it herself, and that wanting anything again, after 11 months of wanting nothing at all, felt less like hope, and more like a wound reopening. He did not seek her out that day, or the next. He told himself there was time. He was wrong about that, though neither of them knew it yet. The weeks that followed fell into a shape neither of them had planned, but both, in their separate ways, came to depend on. 3 mornings the week, Iris climbed the long drive to Eastmere Hall, and 3 mornings the week the children were waiting for her before Mrs. Pruitt had finished announcing her, Della already at the table with her slate, August already at the door, with his hand half raised to take hers before she was through it. She did not see the Duke, not properly. She glimpsed him twice, once crossing a distant gallery with Mr. Harker, the steward, at his heel, once in the stable yard mounting a black gelding while she came up the drive, too far off for either of them to do more than mark the other's presence with a small, formal incline of the head, master to servant, the correct distance kept on both sides. She knew only what the household knew of him, that he was grave, that he had not laughed since his wife died bearing August, that he rode out alone most mornings, and answered no one about where. She thought him, on the strength of that little, a cold sort of man, and told herself it was no business of hers to think of him at all. Mrs. Pruitt disabused her of the coldness, in her own dry way, without ever quite meaning to. It was Mrs. Pruitt who let it drop, over tea in the housekeeper's room one wet afternoon, while Iris waited for the rain to ease before walking home, that his Grace had sat up 3 nights running the winter past with a tenant's boy taken bad with fever, because the boy's own father was away, and the mother frightened half out of her wits, and had said nothing of it to anyone, and would deny it flatly if asked. "He does not care to be thanked," Mrs. Pruitt said, pouring with a steadiness that did not match the words. "It embarrasses him. I have never known a duke embarrassed by gratitude before. Most of them collect it like rent." "Why does it embarrass him?" Iris asked. Mrs. Pruitt considered the question a long moment, the way a woman considers whether a confidence is hers to give. "I could not say, miss," she said at last. "Perhaps he does not believe he has earned it. Perhaps he believes a man ought to do a thing because it wants doing, and not because someone is there to see him do it." Iris said nothing to that, but she carried it home with her through the rain, and found, without quite deciding to, that she thought of the Duke of Eastmere rather more that evening than she had any evening prior, and was faintly annoyed with herself for it, and mended a shirt very fiercely by the fire until the feeling passed. It was in the 4th week that she met him properly, though not as himself. She had stayed past her hour one morning, finishing a hem the nursery maid had botched, and came down the back stair with her basket to find a man in the stable yard, coat plain and dark, sleeves rolled, working alongside the grooms to free a cartwheel sunk to the hub in yard mud. He looked up when her step sounded on the flags, and she took him, from his dress and his labour, for one of the land agents, or perhaps a tenant come to settle an account. "You'll want to go round," he said. "The yard's a bog past the trough." "I have crossed worse bogs than this," she said, and picked her way past him without further comment, and did not see the small, startled quirk at the corner of his mouth, gone almost before it arrived, the closest thing to a smile that had crossed his face in 11 months. He straightened from the wheel and looked after her a moment. "You are the one who teaches the children," he said. It was not quite a question. "I am," she said. "Miss Bell." "Mr. Ashford," he said, which was not a lie, only a name that was his and was not the one that mattered, an old family name he had used before, in another county, when he had wanted a week's peace from being looked at as a duke and nothing else. "Do they mind their letters?" "Della does. August minds nothing but his sister," Iris said. "He has not spoken 10 words to me in a month that were not about her." "He is young to have learnt that lesson so hard," the man said, and something in his voice, some weight beneath the plain words, made her look at him properly for the first time. Hard bones. A nose that had been broken once and set a little wrong. Eyes the brown of strong tea, tired at the corners, watchful in a way that unsettled her, as though he were doing sums behind them that had nothing to do with cartwheels. "What lesson is that?" she asked. "That people leave," he said, "or that the ones who ought to hold on sometimes do not hold on well enough." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, which was, though neither of them named it, the correct thing to say. He did not offer more. He bent back to the wheel, and she went on round the trough as instructed, and neither of them spoke of it again that day, but she found, walking home, that she thought less of the Duke of Eastmere that evening, and more of a plain coated man, with tired eyes and a broken nose, who had said a true thing to her without dressing it up, and had seemed almost surprised at himself for saying it. She did not know that the man she had mended a shirt over the fire wondering about, and the man in the stable yard, were the same man twice over, and that he had arranged the wheel, the mud, and his own presence in that yard at precisely that hour with more care than he would have admitted to anyone. Simply to hear her voice say something true to him without knowing who he was. He told himself, riding out alone the next dawn past the mill road where it had all begun, that he would tell her soon. He did not tell her soon. Grief and shame are patient companions, and they had ridden with him 11 months already, and were in no hurry to be put off now. The trouble, when it came from Lady Seraphina Vane, and it came at the spring assembly in the village hall, which the Duke's aunt attended each year less for pleasure than for the standing it confirmed, and which Iris attended that year only because Mrs. Pruitt had asked her to bring the mended banner-cloths, and had not thought to warn her that Lady Seraphina would be present, sharp-eyed, in violet silk, holding court by the punch-table with the particular stillness of a woman waiting for something to correct. She found her opportunity in Iris almost at once. "You are the creature who teaches the children their letters," Lady Seraphina said, in a voice pitched to carry, the words creature landing soft and precise as a slap gloved in velvet. "I confess I did not credit it until I saw you. A baker's daughter, in the nursery of a duke. What extraordinary economies we are reduced to." The room had gone quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when it senses sport. Iris felt the eyes on her, felt her own hands, red at the knuckle from a winter of dough and lye, and did not hide them. "I teach them their letters, my lady," she said. "I am not aware that flour disqualifies a person from knowing her alphabet. It disqualifies a person from a great many things," Lady Seraphina said, with the small practised laugh she was known for in 3 counties, 3 beats, precise as a bell. "Manners, breeding, the sense to know when a house has been kind enough to her already, without her presuming further. Tell me, does your father know where his daughter spends her mornings? Or does he imagine she is merely at market?" "He knows precisely where I am, my lady," Iris said, "as I think does the whole village now, since you have been good enough to announce it." A ripple went through the room, not quite a laugh, but close enough that Lady Seraphina's mouth thinned. She had not expected the creature to answer plainly. Cruelty wears fine manners and depends always on the other party's silence to complete itself, and Iris had declined to supply the silence. "You are impertinent," Lady Seraphina said. "I am plain," Iris said. "There is a difference, my lady, though I understand it is not always easy to tell them apart from where you stand." It was then that a voice spoke from the doorway, quiet, level, and entirely without heat, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised, because it had never in its life needed to be raised twice. "That will do, aunt," the room turned as one. The Duke of Eastmere stood in the doorway, in his own clothes and his own name. No plain coat, no borrowed identity, and Iris felt something in her chest drop away entirely, because the tired eyes, the broken nose, the voice that had told her a true thing over a stuck cartwheel a month before, belonged, she understood in that single instant, to no land agent at all. "Your Grace," Lady Seraphina began, already recomposing her face into something warmer. "I said that will do," he said again, no louder than before. "Miss Bell teaches my children with more patience than this house has shown them in a year. You will not speak to her again as you have just spoken, in this hall or any other, or you will find your welcome at Eastmere considerably reduced. I do not make that observation twice." He did not look at Iris as he said it. He looked only at his aunt, and it was Lady Seraphina who looked away first. The small bell laughed nowhere in evidence now, and the room's silence changed character entirely, from the hungry quiet of an audience to the uneasy quiet of witnesses, to something they had not expected to see. Iris stood very still, with her red knuckles at her sides, and did not curtsy, and did not thank him, because some instinct told her that thanks, just then, would only make the moment smaller than it was, and when the Duke's eyes came to her at last, brief, unreadable, she held them a moment before he turned, and was gone from the doorway as plainly as he had come. She walked home that night, turning it all over, the plain coat and the fine one, the land agent and the Duke, and arrived at no answer she liked, only a slow, cold certainty that a man who had let her believe, even for an afternoon, that he was someone else, had been doing something to her she had not agreed to, and had not decided until the assembly hall that he wished to stop. She did not sleep well. She did not yet know the whole of what she had begun to suspect, only enough of it to feel the ground under her tilt. And it was that unfinished suspicion, more than the finished fact still waiting for her, that carried her, heavy-hearted, into the days that followed. The whole of it came to her 3 days later, from the last person she would have expected to give it. Della gave it to her, without meaning any harm at all, in the plain, unguarded way of a child who has not yet learned that some truths are meant to be kept from the very people they concern most. They were at the nursery table, the girl copying her letters, when she looked up and said, entirely without weight, "Papa says you are the one who fed us." Before, when we used to go out, Iris's pen stopped on the page. "Your papa," she said carefully. "You mean His Grace." Della nodded, already bored of the subject, already back at her letters. "He told Mrs. Pruitt he watched you do it, from the mill road. He said you never looked to see if anyone was there." Iris sat very still. She thought of the mill wall, the 2 small sets of footprints in frost, the loaves she had set on the sill for nothing, telling herself she would have done it for any stray creature, believing the whole time that no one of consequence had seen her do it. She thought of a man on a horse in the cold grey dark, watching her, weighing her, without ever once stepping down to say a word. "He watched us," she said, "from the road," and said nothing. Della looked up, puzzled now at the change in her voice. "He watches lots of things," she said, with a child's simple honesty. "He is very quiet." Iris finished the lesson somehow. She could not afterward have said how. She walked home that afternoon with her basket over her arm and her hands, for the first time in longer than she could remember, not quite steady. And she did not go back to Eastmere Hall the next morning, nor the morning after that, and when Mrs. Pruitt's boy came with a note asking after her, she wrote back 4 lines, plain as anything she had ever written, saying only that she found she was needed at the bakery, and thanked His Grace for the employment, and hoped the children would mind their letters. She did not write that she felt, turning the whole of it over and over in the small hours, less like a woman who had done a kindness, and more like a specimen a naturalist had watched from a safe distance, noted, and quietly filed away. She had given the bread expecting nothing, wanting nothing, and had believed in her plain, unexamined way that no one of any consequence had seen her give it. To learn now that a duke had stood in the cold and watched her, tested her without her knowing there was a test, and said nothing of it for a month while she knelt to his children, and mended a stranger's coat believing him only a land agent, felt to her like a theft, though she could not have said precisely what had been taken. She told her father she was simply tired. He did not press her. She was not, by nature, a woman who cried where it showed, and she did not cry now, only baked her loaves a little harder than the dough required, and set out the 7th loaf each morning from old habit, though there was no one left at the mill wall to take it, and told herself that was an end to the whole affair. It was not the end of it. Not yet. The Duke did not come to the bakery himself, not at first. He was not a man who pressed, and some hard, honest part of him understood, once Mrs. Pruitt reported the 4 plain lines Iris had sent, exactly why the woman had gone, and did not blame her for it, though the understanding cost him more than he let show to anyone in his household. It was Mrs. Pruitt who went instead, on an errand she did not announce to him, and sat with Iris in the little room behind the bakery on a grey afternoon, with a cup of tea neither of them drank, and told her, plainly and without being asked, the thing she had held back a month before out of loyalty to a man who did not care to be thanked. "You think he watched you as a man watches a creature in a trap, to see what it will do, Mrs., Pruitt said. "I understand why you think it. I would think it myself, in your place, but I have kept that house 11 years, miss, and I will tell you what I know. since he will not tell you himself, being the stubborn sort he is. She told her then of the rent paid without a name given, of the physician sent to a fevered tenant's boy with instructions to bill Eastmere and say nothing, of Iris's own father's account, settled quietly the winter past when a bad batch of flour had nearly ruined them, though neither Belle had ever known who to thank for it, of a dozen small kindnesses done across the parish over the better part of a year, each one wrapped in the same instruction, given so often the steward no longer thought to question it. He asked not to be named. Every time, not once in a 12-month, has he let his own name near a good he has done. He watched you that morning at the mill wall, Mrs. Pruitt said, because his own children had begun slipping his walls to go hungry in a village lane, and no one in his house had told him, and he found it out only by following them himself in the dark, half sick with what he might learn. He watched you give away bread you could not spare to 2 children you owed nothing, expecting no thanks and getting none, and he has not been the same man since. I do not say that lightly, miss. I have watched him grieve a wife, and go half a stranger to his own children for the better part of a year. I have not once, in all that time, seen him move himself the way he moved himself the day he came to me and said, "Find out who she is, and mind you do it gently. She must never feel watched." Iris sat very still with her cold tea, and felt something in her chest that had been clenched for 3 days begin, slowly, to loosen. "He did not test me to judge me," she said, half to herself. "He tested nothing," Mrs. Pruitt said. "He only watched, because for once in 11 months something in this world had moved him, and he did not yet trust himself to go toward it plainly. That is not the same as judging, miss, whatever your pride would like to call it tonight." Iris did not answer that at once. She sat with it a long while after Mrs. Pruitt had gone, turning the whole shape of the year over in her mind. The rent, the physician, the flour, the 7th loaf, the plain coat in the stable yard, and found that her anger, which had felt so solid 3 days before, had gone thin and hard to locate, replaced by something far more difficult to sit with, which was the plain understanding that she had been, without knowing it, cared for the whole of the winter by a man too wounded to say so aloud. She did not go back to Eastmere the next morning either. Some things, she told herself, could not be mended by walking back up a drive as if nothing had happened. If there was to be an answer between them, it would have to be spoken plainly, by him, in his own voice, with his own name attached, or it would not be worth having at all. She did not know that he had already decided the same thing, and was, at that very hour, writing and discarding the same short letter for the 4th time, because a man who had spent a year hiding his own goodness from a whole parish found it, in the end, harder than anything he had ever done to say a true thing about himself to the one person he most wanted to hear it. The note came 2 mornings later, brief and unadorned, in a hand Iris did not recognise, because she had never before had cause to see the Duke of Eastmere's handwriting. It asked nothing of her beyond an hour of her time at the hall, in the small sitting-room off the west gallery, at whatever hour suited her, and it was signed plainly Cassius Vane, with no title attached, as though he wished, for once, to come to her as a name, and nothing grander. She went that same afternoon, because waiting, she found, served no one, least of all herself. The room he had chosen was not one she had seen before, small for a house that size, a fire already lit, 2 chairs drawn close to it rather than the cold formal distance the rest of the house kept between its furniture. It smelled of wood smoke and old leather, and faintly of the beeswax the whole hall was polished with, and after the wide, cold gallery she had crossed to reach it, the warmth of it struck her like a hand laid flat against her chest. He was standing at the window when Mrs. Pruitt showed her in, and did not turn at once, and when he did, she saw that he had left off the fine coat of the assembly hall for something plainer, nearer the man from the stable yard than the man from the doorway, as though he had chosen, deliberately, to meet her as close to himself as he knew how to come. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I would have understood if you had not. I nearly did not," she said. He gestured to the chair opposite his own, and waited until she had sat before he took the other, which she noticed, and filed away without comment, the way she filed away most things about him now. "I will not make you draw it out of me," he said. "You know part of it already. I would rather tell you the rest myself, than have you piece it together from what my household lets slip." He told her then, plainly, in short, unadorned sentences that cost him, she could see, a great deal more than their plainness let on. That his children had begun, in the months after their mother died, slipping the garden wall at dawn, and that he had not known why, and had been too buried in his own grief to ask them properly, until the not asking became its own kind of failure he could not forgive himself. That he had followed them one grey morning half sick with dread of what he would find, and found instead a woman he did not know setting 2 loaves of bread on a cold sill for children who were not hers, expecting nothing, and turning away before they could even think to thank her. "I had believed, by then," he said, "that I had stopped being capable of feeling much of anything. I had buried my wife 11 months before. I had failed my own children so plainly that they had taken to begging bread from strangers rather than trust the house I kept for them. I watched you do a kindness you thought no one of any consequence would ever see, and something in me that I had thought done for good simply moved. I did not know what to do with that. I am not, whatever the Shire believes of dukes, a man who knows easily what to do with feeling. So you watched me instead of speaking to me," she said. "For a month I watched," he said, "because I did not trust myself yet to know whether what moved in me was real, or only the grief in me reaching for anything warm. I did not want to bring you into a house on the strength of a feeling I was not certain I could stand behind. I wanted to know, plainly, whether you were the woman I believed you were when you thought no one was watching, before I asked you to be anything to me at all. That is the whole of my excuse, and I know it is a poor one. I should have told you from the stable yard. I told myself I would, and did not, because I am, it turns out, a coward about exactly one thing in my life, and that thing is you." The fire popped once in the grate. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, and she found she was watching his hands, which were not steady, resting on the arm of his chair, the hands of a man who had faced down his own aunt in a crowded hall without a tremor, and could not, apparently, manage the same composure now. "I did not do it to be seen," she said at last. "I want you to understand that. I would have fed them if no duke in England had ever ridden past that mill road. I know it," he said. "That is precisely why I could not stop thinking of you." She looked at him a long while, weighing, the way she weighed dough, by feel and not by scale. "I will not be watched again," she said. "Not like that. If there is ever to be anything true between us, you will tell me plainly, in your own voice, and let me decide with the whole of the truth in my hands. Not in pieces you thought I was ready for. You have my word," he said. "I am done with watching from roads. I do not want your rank," she said. "I want to be spoken to. That is all I have ever wanted from anyone. I am not asking you to want my rank," he said. I am asking nothing of you tonight. I only wanted you to have the truth whole, from me and not from my aunt, or my housekeeper, or my daughter, who I understand rather let the cat out entirely." A small, unwilling breath of laughter escaped her before she could stop it, and something in his face, watching her, eased for the first time since she had come into the room. "She did laugh, once, at her letters yesterday," she said. "I had not thought she had it in her. Poor solemn thing. She has more of it in her than I have shown her cause for," he said, quietly. "That is another thing I mean to mend, if you will let me try, though I will not pretend the two matters are unconnected in my own mind." She sat with that a long moment, the fire warm on her face, his hand still not quite steady on the chair-arm, and understood, plainly, that he had told her the whole truth and asked her for nothing in return, and that the not asking was, somehow, more persuasive than any asking could have been. "I do not require an answer from you tonight," he said, before she could speak. "I have done enough deciding things for you without your leave this past year. I will not compound it by pressing you now. Take whatever time you need. I will not raise the matter again unless you raise it first." "I know," she said. "That is rather the trouble." He looked at her, not understanding, and she found, to her own surprise, that she did not mind explaining it. "It is difficult to stay guarded against a man," she said, "who will not give you anything to guard against." Neither of them said anything further for a little while. The fire settled. Somewhere above them, faint through the old floors, a child's voice called for someone, answered by another, and both of them sat listening to it, and neither moved to rise, and the room, small and warm after the cold gallery, held them both a while longer than either had meant to stay. She left that evening without giving him an answer, because he had asked for none, and he did not press her toward the door, only walked her as far as the hall, and said good night in a voice that held, beneath its plainness, more patience than she had ever heard a man offer her before. She walked home under a clear cold sky, thinking less of loaves and letters than she had in a month, and more of a pair of unsteady hands resting on a chair-arm, belonging to a man who had told her the truth and asked for nothing, and found, somewhere along the dark lane, that the answer she had told herself she needed time to find had in fact already arrived, and only wanted saying aloud to him, in his own warm room, with the fire between them. She went back 3 days later, not summoned, not sent for. She walked up the long drive herself on a morning gone soft, with the first real thaw of the year, and asked Mrs. Pruitt plainly whether his Grace might spare her a quarter-hour, and was shown once more to the small sitting-room off the west gallery, where the fire was lit again, as though it had never quite gone out since her last visit, or as though someone had taken care that it should not. He rose when she came in, and did not speak first, which she noted, and was glad of, because she had come with words of her own she did not wish handed to her before she could say them herself. "I have thought about it," she said, standing just inside the door with her hands folded in front of her, steady now, entirely steady. "I do not love you for the rescue. I want that understood plainly, because I think it matters to you more than almost anything, and I will not have you doubting it later. I do not love you because you paid a rent I never asked paid, or sent a doctor I never asked sent, or because you are a duke with a warm room and a fire that does not go out. I love you, if I love you at all, because you told me the truth when it would have been easier not to, and you asked nothing of me after, and that is a rarer thing in a man than any of the rest of it. If," he said, very quietly, "if," she agreed. "I have not finished deciding. but I find the deciding goes rather more quickly than I expected." He crossed the room to her, slowly, the way a man crosses towards something he still cannot quite believe he is allowed to want, and stopped near enough that she could see the tired lines at the corners of his eyes had eased since the assembly hall, and reached for her hand, not taking it outright, only offering his own, palm up and waiting. She gave it to him. Her glove was thin wool, mended twice at the seam, and he drew it off her, finger by finger, slowly, as though the slowness itself were a kind of asking, and set it aside, and closed his bare hand around her bare one, and she felt for the first time in longer than she could remember, entirely and simply steady. "I will not press you for more than that today," he said. "I told you I was done pressing." "I know," she said. "I find I do not mind, this time, being asked slowly." He raised her hand, still bare in his, and pressed his mouth once, briefly to her knuckles, red at the joint from a life of dough and lie, and she did not pull away, and neither of them spoke for a long moment after, the fire between them and the whole cold gallery beyond the door forgotten entirely. "I should like to be spoken to plainly for the rest of my life," she said at last. "That is the whole of my condition. Not gently. Plainly, I have had enough of things left unsaid to last me the remainder of it." "Plainly, then," he said. "I love you. I have loved you, I think, since a cold morning on the mill road when you gave away bread you could not spare, and did not once look to see if anyone thanked you for it. I did not know how to say so without frightening you off, and I said nothing instead, and very nearly lost you for the silence. I will not make that error twice." "Then say it once more," she said, "so I am certain I have heard it correctly." "I love you," he said again, and this time there was, at the very corner of his mouth, the same small startled quirk she had seen once before in the stable-yard mud, grown now into something close enough to a real smile that she found she could not look away from it. "Yes," she said. It was the only word she needed. He did not kiss her mouth. He kissed her hand again, and then her brow, once, lightly, and held both her bare hands in both of his before the fire a long while. And outside the window the last of the frost gave way at last to a soft grey rain, and neither of them moved to notice it, content, for once, to let the whole world wait outside a warm room while they did not. They were married that spring, quietly, in the Thornfield church rather than the grand chapel at the Hall, because Iris asked for it plainly, and he did not argue, though the whole shire turned out regardless to see a duke marry a baker's daughter, and there was, by every account after, more genuine gladness in that small church than the county had seen at a wedding in a generation. Lady Seraphina did not attend. She removed herself within the month to a dower cottage 2 counties distant, on an income that was generous and a welcome thereafter. That was cool and seldom extended, and the parish, on the whole, did not miss her company. Thomas Bell kept his ovens, and grew stout and proud in his old age, and told anyone who would stand still long enough that he had always known his daughter had a baker's hands and a duchess's spine, though he had rather hoped, he admitted, that the two would not have to be the same woman quite so soon. Mrs. Pruitt stayed at Eastmere until her own choosing, secure and thanked at last, plainly, for 11 years of loyalty she had never once asked credit for, and it was she who told the story afterward, when she told it at all, exactly as it happened, with no more polish than the truth required. Della and August grew steady and unafraid, no longer slipping garden walls at dawn, because they had learned, at last, that the house they lived in would not let them go hungry, nor let them go unseen. Iris never did teach them to think of her as anything grander than the woman who had fed them first, and they never did think of her as anything less, which suited all three of them very well. A year on, almost to the week, the four of them sat together by the fire, in that same small sitting-room off the west gallery, the rain outside gentler now, spring again, the ovens at Eastmere's own kitchens turning out, every morning without fail, one loaf beyond the day's order, a habit the new Duchess had brought with her, and never once explained to the kitchen staff, who had long since stopped asking why. Della sat reading aloud, haltingly and proudly, from a book too old for her. August slept against his father's shoulder, thumb near his mouth, safe, and Cassius Vane, Duke of Eastmere, sat with his wife's bare hand in his own before the fire, and did not let go of it, not when the log settled, not when the rain freshened at the glass, not for a long while after both children had been carried up to bed and the room had gone quiet around them. It is said, in the end, that a person's true worth is proven only in what they do when they believe no one of any consequence is watching. Iris Vane had proven hers with 2 loaves of bread on a cold sill, wanting nothing, expecting no one to see. It was the only test that ever told the truth about her, and it was the only test that mattered. What a story this one has been to sit with. A woman who gave everything she had to spare without ever once looking to see if it would be noticed, and a man who could not look away once he saw it. If it moved you the way it moved us telling it, subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you, and I would love to know, before you go, what you would have done in Iris's place, feeding 2 hungry strangers at your own door, never once suspecting whose children they truly were. Tell me in the comments. Thank you for staying with this one all the way to the fire, and the rain, and the quiet end of it. There is another story waiting for you soon, and I hope you will come back and sit by it with us.